Hey kids, welcome back. Today's episode, the dramatic conclusion to DevOps Day. Let's do this. All right, as promised, here we are wrapping up our DevOps series by taking our existing pipeline and the environment variables we set up in the last episode and marrying the two together so we can have a true test to production release of our Power App with a changing data source. Now, we'll say to lead this off, so far, this is a SharePoint only operation. Microsoft has yet to expand this to Dataverse or SQL or any other data source. So for now, as of the time of this video, it is late October 2021. This is only SharePoint. But this will give us the steps we need that changing the data source out should not be that big of a deal when Microsoft finally releases other data source possibilities. Now, to recap where we were. In the previous episode, we went through establishing environment variables in your Power App and using those as data sources. Well, we still have our Power App, and as we can still see here, we have one single data source tied to a gallery. That data source is already an environment variable. If you want to see how to set this up, please check out the previous video as we go over all of that particular setup. We do have this application as said, and what we have done is we have added this as a solution. So first things first, we'll go back. We see our data here, which is a list of colors, okay? It's just a gallery, nothing special. I just wanted to prove that the data changes. And what we see, we have two lists that we are focused on. Right now, they're both in the same site, but you'll see how to navigate them to different sites here shortly. In our test list, they're colors, and in our prod list, they're numbers. So we'll be able to see that the data changes. Okay, that's really the only thing we're trying to do here with the Power App is just display that production versus test data is different in some way, right? What the Power App does is irrelevant. So we're not even going to go over anything else in this particular Power App. We're just going to make note of the data and what to expect as we see this move to our production environment. So the Power App's already built. I'm not going to go through that. What I have done is also set this up as a solution. And you will see here we have a solution called variables. It's unique. And inside that solution, now this, since the last video, Power Apps has updated their solution display. So we're in the new one. And it has it broken out in what we need. Now, also in this change, the connection is not coming over. I thought this would be difficult at first, but I was kind of going with it. So in this solution, as we have built it for this video, I have the app, which we just saw, an environment variable for the site, and one for the list. Okay, again, we've set this up in a previous video. We have that solution, and now we're going to take this and move it to production. We're going to use Azure DevOps again, as we did in the original DevOps series. In fact, we're going to look here, and we're going to see the exact same pipeline. Okay, move me over. The build for this particular video will remain unchanged. We see here now I've changed my variable. So you see I have my solution name of variables. And I have it just set up as it was. It's the same export that gets the managed and the unmanaged, has the same. So if you want to review how this was built, again, I have another video that goes back and sets this up. The difference is going to be in the release. And while it seems like a little difference, the bulk of this video is going to be in performing this one little step. So if we go to the release, again, nothing has changed. We have the installer, we pack the solution from source control, we do an import, and then we publish. The change is here on import. Hopefully, as you will see with the plugin, that your Azure DevOps updated automatically. Mine did both on my personal and at work without me having to do anything. So the new thing that we have to look at is this little checkbox here of use deployment settings file. All right, we click that. Oh, and we have the ability to go pick a file, but we have to get said file. You could type it out, but there is 0 point in doing that. What we need to do, though, is now as developers, we're going to have to kind of stretch our legs here because we're going to have to use Visual Studio Code. Okay, the first thing with Studio Code that we want is to get that solution package, and then we'll use Visual Studio Code to generate this particular file, update it as we need it, and then we'll get it back in Azure DevOps. So if we go back to Power Apps, and we go back to our solutions list where we're going to have all of our solutions. Notice again, I'm in my default. I'm going to select and hit export. Standard export features. Let me get myself out the way. Go ahead and publish your changes. It cannot hurt. Will take a while though. All right, we're good. Now it does say 2 issues. Feel free to look at those to make sure there's nothing bad. I've already looked at these and it just tells me I missed a tab order and I didn't do a border correctly for, but it's no big deal. Nothing that's going to stop the app from going. So I've done my changes. I hit next. I've done this a couple times, so of course it increments it. It's going to do a 1.06. I'm going to do it as an unmanaged. You can do it as a managed. I'm going to hit export. And again, it's going to take a minute, so I'll be right back. And we're good. So we see here we have our solution. It is in our downloads folder. At least it is for my particular browser. Now I've taken it from downloads and I've put it in a folder. Just call it data to kind of keep things together. So we see we have the zip package that comes as our exported solution. So what do we need to do with this? We go to Visual Studio Code, and I've already pointed VS Code at this particular folder. The first thing you're going to need to do if you don't have it already, well, is download Visual Studio Code. But assuming you have that, you will need to get an extension, Power Platform Tools. It's from Microsoft, it's in the extension store. You will need to download this and add it to VS Code. What it does for you is gives you access to a command line script that allows VS Code to look into the solution zip file and pull out a JSON file that will be our configuration file. All right, so it'll do it for us for the most part, and I'll show you how. So we look here at our files. I have my 1.006 solution file, and the command line is this, and I'll take a moment, just leave it on the screen so you can take a look. And what this does, we see here the pack solution create settings. It's a solution zip file, and then you give it the zip file name. All right. Hit enter. It'll think for a minute, and it extracted, as we see here, deployment settings JSON. So if we go to my data file folder, we see we have our JSON file. Click it in code, and we have the mostly their version of our configuration file. Now what we see here is we have 2 schema named environment variables. And if we go back to our solution, we will see what those are. We see here of our environment variables, we have the app, we're not concerned about that, but we see here new shared SharePoint Online, 3BA and 8EA, all right, representing our site and our list. If we expand out the site, you see that, here we go, we have the URL. We also have a little prefix name, which we're not going to need, but we need to get the URL and the name of our list. So if we go back to VS Code, we will see here 3BA. All right, so we can come in here. And now we will skip the site name. It does not need the friendly name. So trailing slash is not needed. Make sure I got it right. LSU Slinky, SharePoint, Com, Sites, Power Apps Test Data. And the environment variable here, we see random data list dash test. This is where the change happens. And actually, it would with the URL too if you had a whole different site for your prod list. In this case, they're in the same place. So we see here our prod is random data list dash prod. Note, the internal name does not have the dash. The display name does. We are going to take the display name. Connection references is blank. Now this is an interesting change since I made the first video, the previous video about environment variables, in that the connection references came back as part of the solution. And since the changes, this is blank and has proven not to be needed. So if this does change as I move forward and do more with this, or if the other data sources come online and we revisit this subject, I'll come back. But for now, we're going to leave this blank. So we see here, we have our JSON files, deployment settings.json. We will go ahead and we will save that. And that's all we need to do here. Now we need to get this in Azure DevOps. If we go to our repo, now I've already run the build. So we can see we have variables here, my managed and unmanaged folder, much like, as you can tell from the others here in my repo, from the other videos, it's done the exact same way. What I've added is a folder called, deployment settings. You can name it whatever you want to. And what I'm going to do is get that new file, and I'm going to drag it into Azure DevOps. Let's go ahead and commit. We have our file, and if we click, we see it contains what it is we had just typed in Visual Studio Code. Okay. Now that we have that, let's go revisit our release, and we have our deployment settings file checked, but now we have a blank, and we're just going to go into our particular repo, variables for our current project, deployment settings JSON, hit OK. Now, if you want to be official about it, we can get our solution name and do that there, just to make this a little bit more proper use of the variables within the pipeline. Up to you on that. But that's it. We had to just tag our solution, our release, I should say, with this particular file. Everything else is the exact same. So I'm going to uncheck that because I was playing earlier. Just need these here. And we're done. Everything else from the previous videos remains. We can hit save, hit OK. And now before we run this release, again, I've done the build already. I want to go ahead and show you two things. One, remind ourselves what the original did. And if we go to apps, environment variables, again, we're going to see, we should see the colors. And we do. And if we go to our other environment, so this sales trial, because I had to borrow me a Dataverse enabled environment, so I went ahead and just did a trial to prove this would work. If we go to solutions, we will see that we do not have our variables solution. So move me out of the way again. You see these are just the dynamics defaults, and if we go to apps, we should see nothing. Eventually. Oh, we see things, but we only see the dynamics. We don't see ours. Okay. We've made our changes to our release. We've saved it, and we hit create. Release 17 has been created. Let's go take a look at the logs. And we can watch it go. Now, this is going to take a minute. By no means is Azure DevOps going to be fast here, so we're going to go ahead and edit out the wait part so we can see how it ends. Be right back. Okay, we're back, and we see that our build is done, and we have succeeded. Now, if we go back to Power Apps, we are again in our production environment, and if we go to Solutions, Variables pops up. That's good to see. We click on variables, we're going to see we have It's going to look identical to development. It's even going to have the name of our environment variable listed as it would appear. So you can see here it says test. But if we click on our app, just to give it a test, we will see that the data will reflect prod. So if you think about it, if you had two sites, the lists are likely going to be named the same thing. In my case, I have the same site in different lists, depending on how you do it. So the internal name is, well, the displayed name on the app won't change, but the data source that it's connecting to is updated through the pipeline. So as our app comes up, boom, we see we have our production data as we noted before, because now we've moving from colors to numbers. So if we go and we close that down and we go back to our environment, one more step and we're done. Now this was the first time this was pushed. If we go to apps, all we're going to see is the apps that came with Dataverse or with Dynamics. If you remember from the previous videos, the app doesn't appear here because it's not been shared with us. Now in the previous videos I shared a way to get that app shared with you. Turns out I have subscribers, and one of them, thank you, man, gave me a script that he generated that changes a given app's owner, and this is it right here. It's PowerShell. You're going to have to run. You have to run in the SharePoint Online interface as an administrator. As you can see here, installs the modules for Power Apps and Azure. You log on, so this is your address, running as a user, otherwise it's going to prompt you, so this is just kind of a nice way to avoid the Azure prompt. From here we just set up the environment GUID. You get that, put it in quotes. The app you're looking for, in this case our EP3 environment variables app, not the solution, the app. And then we go ahead and get that app. Go to Azure AD, and then we're going to assign it a new account as an owner. So we see here we get a new owner email address. So you can, if you want, duplicate, if you're running a small shop and you want the owner to be you can duplicate it. But if you have another address for another user that needs to be the owners, you set that here, and it uses the set admin Power App owner function to change the owner of that particular app. If we bring up our PowerShell app module, we can see here it has run for me. I will run again. I've hidden the code because it's got my password. And now that that is done, if we refresh our apps screen, so as we see here, we have our app. We click and we will see that it still reflects our production data. 1, 2, 3. So that's it. We have now completed the series that took us from building a pipeline in Azure DevOps to get our Power Apps from a test environment into source control and out again. And now we've done it again with environment variables, allowing us to change our data sources without having to open and recompile our Power App. I hope this was useful. As this changes, hopefully we'll have more DevOps days in the future. Until then, see you guys.